If you always do the thing that's the most frequent for your hand, you're prone to leaving big issues later in the tree where you just arrive at a node and you have no bluffs.
It's wire to wire and a dominant performance from Stephen Chidwick.
And Stephen Chidwick here in Madrid finally gets himself a Triton title.
Any tips for handling a stare down or just being watched in general?
I think the most important thing is,
what are some of the things that you found valuable that, if you were to recommend to a player today?
the trainer is good, but you have to be careful. When you find a surprising result, you don't take it as gospel and say, okay, I need to be playing like this.
Do you have any suggestions for how to stay motivated, how to use something other than achievement?
If you are just stressed about the results all the time, or if you're really chasing the results, then you're just going to cause yourself a lot of pain. I think that what you see out of the best players is...
Stephen the Nomad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad we can make it work. You are a very popular man in the requests. I knew that people would be interested in having you on the podcast, but I will say it's interesting for me because one of the common threads is that the guys who know you very well both love you but enjoy you a lot, and then the perception is that the poker public doesn't know you particularly well. The robot label seems to pop up a lot, which I think is really inaccurate for a couple reasons. I'm just riffing here now, but if someone wanted to say something that was I don't know, not negative exactly, but Space Cadet seems a little more to the point than robot. I think of you as lost in thought sometimes, never robotic. I don't know if it's the movements of the chips or something that gets the robot label, but when I've seen you, just sometimes maybe you don't hear something the first time because you're thinking about something, but robot never comes to mind. Anyway,
hopefully it's
you go ahead.
because of how I play poker, but
Yeah,
I think
solver.
I've always been an extremely introverted person, and especially in big groups of people, I have worked a lot on my own comfort level and my willingness to be involved in conversation and stuff like that. But in general, especially, if I'm on a stream or something like that, and I'm both surrounded by people and surrounded by cameras. That's typically a time when I'm not too comfortable expressing myself, and I know myself, and I know that interacting in those situations is likely to ramp up my own anxiety, and that's obviously not something that I want to do when I'm trying to compete for a lot of money.
Yeah. There's a performative quality to large groups, even if you're friends with all of them, that really bothers me. I've always, it's funny as we're in this mixed setting where it's there are a bunch of people watching us, but not right now. And for me, that takes away, let's say 80% of that performative pressure. There's still always, or maybe 80% of the time that I'm doing a podcast, it's in my head that, there are other people listening or watching. Maybe this would be boring to them. Let's, move the conversation along or something, but not having, maybe there's something still to the physical eyes and sounds of people that adds to that kind of pressure and anxiety.
I've always enjoyed smaller groups for hanging out. I find that discussions can be a lot, or I favor the more kind of deep and introspective discussions that I think are more prevalent in one-on-one situations than with a big group.
Yeah, the depth of each disclosure doesn't have to, go on a billboard for 9 people to now react and reflect on. It's can be more targeted based on, that center of two people's Venn diagram or three people's Venn diagram. It becomes a very, very small sliver when you have 10, 12 people there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I did what's become a little bit of my routine now when prepping a podcast, which is type the guest name into my phone and see what Apple spits out for my notes. I take a lot of notes. Just always been, we'll say, a hobby. And one of the first things I came up with was your name coming up in an Ike Haxton quote. So we're always in for a treat when we get an Ike quote. Let me read it to you. Said, and this is on the topic of conservation of energy. There's a lot of overlap between people who seem to feel a lot of pressure to give 110% to every hand that they're at the table and people who spend a lot less time at the table than they could. And then there are the exceptions who just do both. Someone like Stevie comes to mind, who looks unbelievably dialed in 100% of the time he's at the table and also does everything right in all the ways I described, rebuying from hand one. Divorce is another guy, but he doesn't project the intensity in the same way Stevie does, but I do think it's there. You and I have talked some about this. You told me about a year ago about a log that you would keep about how you felt you played each couple of levels on every break, how you felt your focus was. You also told me that you felt like you got the majority of what you could out of that log, which sounded like a fair amount, but that it felt time to move on. Can you talk about that? Talk about what it's like to put so much focus in at the table and how you give yourself breaks?
Yeah, I think for a long time for me, I just kind of removed those decisions of when am I going to rebuy right away or wait, am I going to show up from hand one. I had already decided beforehand, like I want to be playing as much as possible, and if I feel like I'm playing less well or I feel less ready to play, then I'm gonna work on playing as well as I can when I don't feel my best. So that was kind of a conscious decision to kind of remove that decision and that the possibility of doing things differently, and just put all of my focus into what I could control at the time, which was, how well I'm playing. I think I've always been very motivated by improvement, I guess, let's say. Just doing things better than I have in the past, and keeping track of things that are difficult to, like, it's difficult to look back over a whole Triton stop and say, okay, like how focused was I over this stop? How much was I paying attention in between hands? How do I feel like I was emotionally reactive to the situations or whatever? Like, it's hard to average it out because like only specific things stick out in your mind. So that's why that was my motivation behind keeping the log of like, okay, I'll just score myself every break of how was that last two levels, like how engaged was I, et cetera, and try and find patterns and see if the things that I'm doing off the table to increase my focus and increase my performance, if they're actually having tangible effects or if they're just a waste of time. So I did that for quite a long time, but after a while, it got to be a bit restrictive or a bit, I guess, oppressive, where I felt like I was constantly judging myself and I was basically just not giving myself any freedom or trust, essentially. And when I was able to let go of some of that internal pressure to be constantly doing every minute thing in an optimal way, I felt it released me to the possibility of letting things happen more naturally, and actually provided some opportunities that I wasn't seeing or wasn't giving enough credit to before, that also improved performance.
Can you give an example of the latter?
Just being more in tune with the kind of the energies or the situation as it is. I feel like when I was coming into the situation with a preconceived notion of how I wanted to be, how I wanted to my focus to be, or how I wanted my when I was kind of judging myself for like, oh, I didn't pay attention to the showdown, or I didn't, I missed the action here, and I was kind of reprimanding myself for it.
Yep.
I was missing out on just the richness of the situation and maybe small things that people are saying, or just being more I guess more receptive of the situation as is, I think allowed me to access like the flow state more often, and gave me insights that perhaps I would have been blind to if I was fully focused on specific things that I decided before the day started.
When you say fully focused, some imagery pops up for me, which is like a container, say a vase, and that word fully really sticks with me. Is when something's full, you're not receptive because there's no room. You don't want an empty vessel with no plans. You're not, Jackson Pollock walking up and throwing paint everywhere. But in any field, there needs to be some receptivity. You need to have some room to adjust. As you were talking, kind of a corollary that was striking me, you and I are both parents, and I don't think either of us, from my experience, fall into this so much, but there's that parenting that we're going on vacation, we have tickets to this, we're going to that, we're doing this, and then if you're so rigid to your plan, you cannot notice the vibe and be like, the children are not enjoying this, or like we didn't plan perfectly well and they're hungry right now, like maybe we don't go to that decent dinner and we just grab a snack here, because that way they can enjoy whatever this experience is ahead of time. And having that flex, where of course there are other people who make constant issues or cause constant issues in their life because there's no planning and it's all flex, and then they can't go to that show because they didn't buy the tickets a day ahead of time or whatever it is. That balance as a poker player when it comes to focus and discipline, I find really interesting, because so often I think the conversations happen in isolation, where especially the discipline conversation, it's so appealing to be like, if I do this, I will have 10% more focus or get 30 minutes more sleep or whatever it is. And yeah, isolated, that sounds great if you can, do that, but the cost is usually not nearly as measurable. And that lack of receptivity, it's so tough to quantify. So it's tough to know, are you doing a net good in so many different forms of discipline?
Yeah, it's a great point. And yeah, the more I have been introspective about these things, about my life in general, the more I find myself trying to find that middle way in as many different areas as I can. Yeah, I think there's always something to be gained from encompassing the opposite side of the spectrum. And yeah, I've tried to more often now look at where I'm pushing the hardest in one direction, and look at that as an opportunity to just explore like what I might be leaving behind me by being so intentional in that way.
Same. I was just talking with my sister-in-law and her longtime boyfriend about just kind of arguing for the sake of arguing. And I love, like, maybe I just do it because it's my nature anyway. But we were talking about, like, my brother-in-law essentially, like, sometimes just picking fights that he doesn't even believe in, over, let's say, a political issue. And I love it from the perspective of, one of the benefits is exploring another side. You start to empathize with a point of view you may strongly disagree with, but it helps you kind of understand where someone's coming from in a way where I think it's difficult to understand it quite as well unless you have the motivation to actually achieve something. Like, trying to convince someone of a point you don't believe in really helps you kind of feel it much more fully than, like, I don't know, just reading an article from, Fox News just because you want to understand them a little bit. You're still going to be, like, so coded in animosity or dislike, if you have my political opinions. And but actually trying to, sell someone else on this argument, it's also that, like, kind of play acting, that fun that I find really enjoyable about games is kind of picking up temporarily an identity that's not yours that you can put back down after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's especially in our current culture, with everything seemingly getting more and more polarized. I think it's definitely very valuable to really try and empathize with the opposite point of view that you have, because I think the truth basically always lies somewhere in the middle, between the two extremes. And I think that it's a very pressing kind of need for us as a culture right now, is to find a way to be able to accept the differences and kind of not paint everything in such black and white language and ideas.
On that note, I have to give a shout out to a great recommendation that Stevie gave me maybe a year and a half ago. What's Our Problem by Tim Urban. Very good read on that topic of kind of trying to find the middle. Just a really smart guy who spent a lot of time trying to understand loud voices on opposing sides and make some sense of it. Did you end up reading it?
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. I thought he did a great job of it being a sharp book that I don't think is going to be over anybody's head. I thought his language was really stellar in terms of I didn't feel like he was speaking stupid, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I had to look anything up really. He did a great job of explaining himself. Difficult task. So everyone knows that you are one of the winningest poker players of all time. You are number 3 or number 4, kind of bouncing back and forth with Jason on the all-time money list. But kind of embedded in that and the nature of tournament poker is you must be one of the losingest poker players of all time in terms of just the number of tournaments that you bust, which when I think about failure, that's where you really learn in general. I think, there's countless quotes about failing teaching us far more than success does. So I wanted to hear a little bit about that, about the resilience and some of the knowledge and wisdom you've gained over the years from just busting so many tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates with me. Definitely a lot more to be learned from losses than wins. And learning how to lose has been a long road. That was definitely a weakness in my childhood and early part of my career. Just being so invested, so attached to the game that losing, especially if I made a mistake or did something questionable to lose, it used to take me a long time to get over. Like oftentimes I would need to like, it would ruin the rest of the day, and then I'd wake up the next day and I'd be reset. But I used to find it very difficult to get out of those repeating thought patterns and kind of obsessing over hands I played, stuff like that. What helped me the most from working with a performance coach in this area was looking at my inner dialogue in those moments. It's hard to do like in the moment, but kind of going back to those, reviewing them with a coach or whatever, and asking myself, okay, like what am I telling myself? What are the stories that I'm repeating? Are they accurate? Are they helpful? How could we rephrase, change the language, structure those same thoughts or same feelings in a way that's constructive instead of destructive? And that had a huge impact on me. One, being able to move on from the losses and being able to much more quickly put things in perspective and move on. And two, being able to take the lessons learned in a tough bust out and kind of integrate those. So for me, yeah, it was a lot about just like looking at the language that I'm using. And my coach would say like, okay, pretend like you're talking to a friend and you're using the same language, talking to them like this, like, would that be acceptable? And I'd be like, oh, of course not. Like, I'm being a huge jerk. Like, I would never talk to someone like that. And so, like, obviously, you shouldn't talk to yourself like that. So, yeah, that's my kind of biggest takeaway, and probably what's helped me the most, kind of as a person off the table too. Just kind of looking at my own inner thoughts and trying to restructure them whenever I can.
I like that example a lot at the end when you talk about, hey, if I was talking to a friend, would I ever use this language? No, I'm being a jerk if I do that. And it seems so acceptable for us to, in our inner dialogue, speak to ourselves that way. And I wouldn't even say just acceptable. I think encouraged when you talk about competition. It's almost like there's this idea that if you're not hard on yourself, you don't care or you're not trying. And, as we're both guys who like sports our whole life and, kind of competition in general. And I think passively or directly, it tends to be instilled in people, or at least 20, 30 years ago, it felt like something that was instilled, which was if you have a blank face after you screw up, you must not care. And you almost feel, especially in team sports, compelled to express some sort of emotion that, says, I screwed up or whatnot. And then it starts to kind of affect the way you feel about yourself. I don't know. It just seems like this kind of toxic circle. But I had a question. You mentioned with your performance coach, kind of reshaping the language. Could you give me an example of what some of the wrong language that you previously were using, and when you feel successful at remolding how you view a situation, what the good language looks like?
Sure, yeah. So there's a few different kind of key pieces of language that different people use. For myself, the biggest offender was should. I would use the word should a lot in like, I should have known better. I shouldn't be making this mistake. I should, and it adds an extra layer of culpability and guilt on top of the already bad feelings. It's kind of blaming myself and exaggerating the negative emotion, I guess. So for me, whenever I notice myself shooting, I try to just rephrase that as, okay, I would like to pay more attention or trust my inner feelings more in these situations. Like instead of I should have known that he would, like, I should have folded because he obviously wasn't bluffing or whatever. Kind of rephrasing that to, I would like to have more trust in my gut feeling and be more willing to go against the theoretical play in this kind of situation. And then one, it's more accurate, and two, it's constructive, and it doesn't add this additional layer of blame that I feel like for me makes it harder to internalize that mistake and grow from it, and harder to get over it also.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a subtle but massive shift that, to me, what's embedded there is the fact that you're a human being and you're fallible, like you're not going to be perfect. And the should talk, there's an implication that I've done this before, I should be able to do it again. Like I've bowled a strike in bowling. Why don't I bowl a strike every time? This is ridiculous. And it's just not realistic. But the follow-up that comes to mind for me, I've always thought of anger as kind of one of the most accessible and easy fuels that a person being competitive can reach to. It's not clean burning and it's toxic for you long term, but it's so accessible. And that should talk, it feels adjacent to anger to me, like I should be perfect. And it's kind of like an easy thing to fall into is being really hard on yourself. And as, again, we talked about it, but like the really high level performers, take a Tom Brady or a Tiger Woods that I'm picking on, they just have this seemingly expectation of perfection about themselves. And it leads to really good results in some cases on the field in competition. So I guess my question is, how do you evolve leaving behind such an accessible fuel for motivation, still stay motivated and work hard while maybe leaving that in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I thought about a lot. Like, how much is this necessary for? Like, obviously, it has been a fuel, has been a motivation to get me to where I am today. So, like, is this something I want to get rid of? Like, and just like disentangling the being so hyper self-critical and kind of the enjoyment and the, because if I look at what got me into poker in the first place and why I like games so much, it's always because I enjoy growing, I enjoy being challenged, I enjoy learning new things, and I find when I can put the judgment aside, I'm actually more likely to, instead of having this big list of hands that I've played that I want to go like run back to my room on break and check, or like can't see if I made mistakes at the end of the day. To know basically like if I am valid for my own like self-worth. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of that, I'm much more likely to maybe approach a friend or talk about a situation that I'm not sure about. I feel like when I'm in a mindset of judging and needing to be right and needing that level of validation, I don't want to, for example, ask someone about a spot that I'm not sure about because maybe it was a big mistake, and then like I'm going to feel really bad because their view of me might be diminished, for example. Whereas
Sure.
if I am able to put aside the judgment, maybe I have a much smaller list of hands that I want to check at the end of the day. But those are hands that I'm genuinely curious about. Like, oh, I didn't know what to do here. I really want to explore this situation. I really want to fill that gap in my knowledge. It's not like I prefer to be wrong, but I like the opportunity to learn something in that spot, and I'm genuinely like excited and curious to see what the answer was, because I know that that's an area I can grow from, rather than just hoping that I was right so that I can feel good about myself, you know?
Yeah. When I hear you say that, it's almost like I'm thinking it's about shrinking the gap between playing versus the bot and playing in real life. Because when we're playing versus the bot, I don't know many people who get angry that they made a mistake. Like, oh, I'm really curious. That wasn't anything like what I thought it was. Holy crap, this spot is definitely far different. And it would be lovely, to get to that place with, especially live poker, where you often don't get another chance for a while, or at least you have to start over, and it's kind of a long grind back. So something that I only found out about you a year, 18 months ago, we were final table of a Poker Masters event together, and something came up. I had no idea that you are an excellent Starcraft player, at least relative to me. You're going to be humble and say, okay, you're not a pro, but you've reached a very high level in Starcraft, which is a game I'm very fond of. I first found like 28 years ago. Amazing that game has stood the test of time like it has. I mean, I'm playing some StarCraft 2 now. StarCraft 1 was, something like close to 30 years ago.
Great
but
game.
For those who don't know anything about StarCraft, can you talk about a little bit what you've learned from StarCraft, how it's helped you, your skill sets? I used to make a lot of StarCraft analogies with friends who knew it, just because I felt like I feel like I gained a lot. I guess real-time strategy games in general, but StarCraft being the one that I really played a lot.
Yeah, it's been a while since I played a game. I had to cut myself off. It was a bit too fun, and I found myself just being a bit too happy to be done with playing poker for the day, so that I could play more StarCraft. And then at some point, I realized, okay, this isn't a positive influence on my life at this point, so I had to give it up. But I still watch it quite a bit. I really look up to the best players, and it's such a great game to watch. I feel like the strategy is so deep, and it's the psychology and the player versus player matchups, and I'm sure that this is what you love about it too. But like the mind games and it's obviously a very deep and strategic game, but then I guess it actually ties into our Viveki discussion of relevance realization, and like picking, like at any one time you've just got so many options of things you could be doing, and the best players are just picking the right thing to do. Like obviously they're very fast, but their decision making is really, I think, what makes them so great. And now we're seeing, I don't know how much you watch it, but they used to think that when there was kind of a ceiling of how old you could be before your reactions got too bad to compete at the highest level. And they used to say that these guys, when they come back from military service, which is compulsory in Korea, that like they wouldn't be competitive anymore. But now we're seeing some of the top players coming back from military service and getting back to a very high level using just like great decision making. And that's been cool to see. But I don't know if that really answers your question of what I learned from it, but just that I love the game.
I mean, what I took from that is it's how you split your attention and how you decide, you're trying what's most salient and where do I spend my time? Because StarCraft is this game where there's tons of micromanaging to do, but you only have so much time. Even if you're a wizard clicking like crazy everywhere, there's always, and you're trying to decide how to prioritize. For me, that's been invaluable in life, but even in poker, I think, especially if you play shot clock tournaments, trying to decide how to allocate your bandwidth and try to figure out what to be focusing on, because with unlimited time, eventually you can do just about everything you want, but the reality of life, even away from the poker table, you have, I don't know, somewhere between 14 and 18 waking hours, depending on how much you sleep, and you're trying to decide to optimize that for your own pleasure and future goals and whatnot. It's, I don't know, it's nice when you've got this microcosm, this 20-minute video game that really just shines a light on the limitations of being a human being and trying to do your best.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's a good point. Like, you can definitely get, when you're playing Starcraft, you can get like really into the micro and moving all your units perfectly, and you're like really controlling your army. And then you look at your bank and you realize, oh, I haven't spent all of my money, and I've got like, I need to build a bunch of supply depots, whatever it is. So yeah, having that, the ability to kind of have the two levels of awareness be kind of really focus on the minutia of the specifics of what you're doing, but then always kind of have in the back of your mind, is there something more worthy of my time? And yeah, like you said, it is a microcosm of life. Like, you can be really invested in playing Starcraft and forget that you have all of these other things that you would like to do with your life or whatever. And like, just balance with everything is so important. And that ability to keep perspective on things.
Yeah, I found that it's taught me a lot about how my brain works and how in different moods I might zone too into micromanaging something very small, or sometimes I might zoom out too much and be thinking too much big picture and let my military just get swallowed up because I'm managing my economy too much. But I really like studying my brain in the aftermath and saying like, oh wow, I really seem to have this consistent bias, towards wanting to win these little skirmishes, and it's the constant try to win the battle, lose the war, is a very common type of thing. And I think that happens a lot in life where, you could just take a relationship. People get swallowed up in an argument. They really want to win the argument and they lose a great relationship over it because they're not thinking, about the big picture. I kind of want to take the self-help angle a little bit with this and ask the question that I think a lot of the audience would be interested in is, you have maybe close to 20 years experience as a professional and bouncing back and forth, not saying you found the perfect center today, but getting to make errors in each direction. What are some of the things that you found valuable that, if you were to recommend to a player today who's kind of newish to their career, in terms of where and when enforcing discipline has been particularly helpful for you, where it may have been an error and overstated? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't really view myself as particularly disciplined. I really love poker and I love games in general, and it was never really a big effort for me to spend as much time as I did studying, for example. I guess in terms of discipline, there's been various attempts I've had, whether it be cold showers or meditation or I don't know, diet related stuff, sleep hygiene, whatever. And I think similar to what we were saying previously, where if you come into a situation, well, it's difficult to say because there's something to be gained from the discipline too. And I think sometimes it can be useful to commit to something that you might not always want to do every day to push through something and gain the insights that you might not get from just kind of doing it when you feel like it. So it's hard to give advice about like routines and stuff like that. I've definitely found that I've got a lot out of having routines and doing a lot of meditation, doing a lot of breathing exercises, various things. But I would say that the end goal is not to, meditate more and more every day and never miss a day, for example. The end goal is to incorporate the lessons that it teaches you, and maybe you can be meditating when you're driving a car or when you're playing poker or throughout the entire day. So I guess, I'm not sure what specific insights I would have other than just take what you can from it and be willing to discard it if it's not working, I guess.
On the topic of motivation, I think a lot about sports and how kind of a games and sports mentality inflects a lot of poker players' thinking. And in sports, there's this concept of, the road to the championship and pushing yourself. And there's this idea that you can kind of will yourself to victory, which doesn't really exist in poker. You can't just try hard enough and you're going to win today. It's not up to you entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I think achievement is such a motivating force for people so often. And that's where there's this kind of deflation for tournament players who go a long time, maybe doing most of what they think is right. And it just doesn't seem to happen for them, especially people who play in very large fields. It can go a long time. Do you have any suggestions for how to stay motivated, how to use something other than achievement that is more attainable on a consistent basis to keep that focus that you see in some of these really determined athletes?
I think it's very necessary, obviously, in poker to detach how you feel about yourself or your play from the results, because they're so uncorrelated that it's if you are just stressed about the results all the time, or if you're really chasing the results, then you're just going to cause yourself a lot of pain. I think it takes just looking at yourself objectively and critically and saying like, am I playing better than I was yesterday? Did I play well today? Like breaking up your performance into smaller sections that you can easily track and measure against yourself and then make progress on. And I think there's just always an opportunity, like your external situation can always be viewed as neutral. Everyone would like to win tournaments and views winning tournaments as good and losing, like not making money, is bad. But there's nothing intrinsically good or bad about any result. And I think that some of my most satisfying moments have come from disappointing results where I felt a lot of personal growth in how I responded to those. And I think that looking at disappointment, looking at events that are commonly viewed as bad with a mindset of an opportunity to react to that to the best of your ability, just unlocks the door to be fulfilled in every day, regardless of what happens.
When you mention that, a thought going through my head is this concept that you can't see there from here, in the sense, something we'll talk about later, but both of us have been very interested in a lecture series by a guy named John Vervaeke. And early on, I remember, do you remember the research of L.A. Paul?
Transformative experiences, I think, is
Yeah.
the
And
book that he mentions a lot from her or him.
yeah, the crux of what I got from her research was that, like, if you're trying to decide whether or not to have kids, you're extremely ill equipped to make that decision, because you're just going to be a very different person when you have kids. And I think about, say, a 13-year-old who spends a lot of time on social media. They may desperately want to get famous, but that person who maybe does achieve all this fame 30 years down the road will have a very different picture of fame. They might still like it, but it's a very different world. And the same with a lot of people who question, like, this guy's got $1 billion. Why is he working so hard and stressing? Like, I would be on a beach. And so, well, that's, when you get there, you'll probably have a very different idea of what you do and don't want to do. And that's what I think about a lot when the conversations with up and coming and aspiring players. I think they may have a different idea of what it will be like on the other side if they achieve the things they're looking to achieve. And so there's this kind of disharmony in conversations around achievement and around, how you'll feel winning a tournament, how you'll feel losing a tournament. I just find it really interesting, because I often find that there are some of these conversations where, two people who may be on the same wavelength intellectually, maybe even strategically in poker, they can't really harmonize when they talk about achievement. And it's kind of like, has to be a little bit left on the side, unanswered for a bit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's such a cultural view of success as being, external achievements and accolades and stuff like that, that it is hard to disentangle that from your own mindset. And I definitely was driven for my entire career basically by achievement, and I had goals, concrete goals that I wanted to achieve. And yeah, I would be lying if I said that didn't, I don't think that contributed to me getting to where I am today. But at the end of the day, you do have to try and shift shift what you're valuing, because if you do define success as a tangible result, you keep shifting the goalposts, and you'll never get there, right? And ideally, we would like to be satisfied at some point, right? Not constantly striving for something we don't have.
Yeah, I think, not devil's advocate, but when I think about, like, a young teenage me, he would hear something like that from an athlete, a celebrity, and say, "Oh, that's nice. He learned how to say the right things." And only really over time have I kind of learned, no, that not going to say the person's fully actualized. We're not trying to, speak from, the top of the mountain, but it is this gradual process that probably the early stages you don't even realize is taking place. But I think that almost everyone can acknowledge what you're saying as true in the extreme when you're told you have 1 week left to live or a day left to live. Very few people are like so legacy obsessed or whatnot that they're like, oh God, I got to get all the legacy. Like, you want to spend time around the people who really appreciate you, who love you. You're maybe less interested in signing autographs or the adulation of random people who don't know you at all. And on your way to that extreme, there are just many, many steps, it seems like, whether a person wants to take them or not. It seems like, as a person, and this is my guess as someone who is only in the poker world, but it seems like in all spheres that seems to be a pretty common denominator as you kind of climb the stairs of success.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So along those lines, I want to ask you about a little mini drama from the NFL that I thought was an interesting. It made me think about poker. It made me think about the point of all this. And this was, you didn't hear about Baker Mayfield and Tom Brady at all kind of getting in a little tiff, did you?
No, I'm pretty out of the
Okay.
loop with most things.
Sure. So Baker Mayfield is the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady, when he had a comeback, he was the QB for the Bucs for maybe 2 years, and he won a championship. And Baker Mayfield said on a podcast, the building was a little different with Tom in there. Obviously, playing-wise, Tom is different. He had everybody dialed in, high-strung environment, so I think everybody was pretty stressed out. They wanted me to come in, be myself, bring the joy back to football for the guys who weren't having as much fun. And Brady is now a announcer, and he shot back pretty hard about Baker Mayfield, saying, I thought stressful was not having Super Bowl rings. This wasn't daycare. If I was going to have fun, I was going to go to Disneyland with my kids. There's a way to approach this game, and it's with the right mindset to push teammates.
Do you think he has more fun going to Disneyland with his kids, or?
I don't think Tom likes Disneyland, especially with that level of fame, man. Disneyland sounds miserable, even if you got the super private like escort to the front of the line. Like, shit, that's Tom Brady. No, yeah, so when it comes to poker, my thinking is I don't know about you. I think you know about me that I'm on the extreme of this continuum where I can't not think holistically, and if I find myself not having a good time for multiple days in a row where I'm not delivering a service to people that I think is valuable, I'm not going to keep doing it. I'm going to change something up and kind of follow mostly what I want to do. My tolerance for the time horizon of doing things you don't want to do is not very long. Mm-hmm. Where do you think you fall on that continuum that I've kind of built here? Maybe fabricated a little bit between this Brady, everything to win the championships, we'll worry about having fun later, and Baker Mayfield saying, I'm sure he wasn't saying we're sacrificing being good, but there is this kind of implicit, maybe not doing everything possible, that fun and a good loose atmosphere is very important.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with performance. I'm actually just reading a book now called Top Dog, which is about the science of competition, and they go into kind of anxiety, arousal levels, and they say that basically everyone has their own threshold of like sympathetic arousal, like fight or flight response, or anxiety, uncomfort when competing, that is beneficial. And a lot of people, I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but a lot of people perform better with some degree of pressure or anxiety. and others do better when it's lower. I know for myself, I feel like I'm playing the best poker when, or in the times that I've felt the most in the zone and that I'm playing the best, there's like almost a lightness and a really fun quality that it has for me, where I do think that I have some perspective on the fact that it doesn't really matter if I win or lose, but I'm having like a ton of fun competing and trying to win because that's what I really enjoy doing. And so I think that's what I'm striving towards more, is to be in that mindset. But I know some people feel like they play the best when they are really very kind of engaged and feeling like this is everything, like nothing else matters, and I need to be like like the stakes are as high as possible. That's when they feel like they play the best. For me, that's not the case. I'm not sure if that really answers your question.
It does, and that's where like I'll get on my soapbox a bit, and I'm critical of that last approach because I think they're too zoomed in. That they probably do play their best at that moment. I'll give when I play sports, if I don't acknowledge the other person at all, especially like I play a lot of racket sports, and because of the individual nature of them, I've noticed not looking my opponent in the eyes, mostly just not looking at them at all, except for their body to the, how it correlates to their positioning and what I think is coming my way, backhand or forehand. I play really, really well when I just stay focused and don't acknowledge that there's another human being. If I engage in chatter and all that, I do play worse. But it's a hedge. It's this purposeful hedge that is to say, I'm blunting the pain of a potential loss, which in some senses, like I think a lot of people would call that loser talk, prepping for the outcome that you don't want to happen. But it's my long-term outlook that you will lose sometimes. And that pain, if it is too strong, early on, pain of losing is really important to build character. But I think at a certain point, it can become this kind of chronic illness, avoiding loss, when you're taking losses so strong and they're still going to come, as is the case with poker, where you're going to lose far more often than not. And my opinion, I just don't really buy that it doesn't have reverberations for people in their life in terms of the effect it has on their relationships. Doesn't mean that they're kicking the dog when they go home or screaming at the wife, but maybe just a little grumpier, a little bit less focused on things because you're naturally more consumed with loss avoidance. And I think I've brought this up in a couple of different ways on the podcast before. It is kind of my soapbox, is that I think we have a lot of the wrong heroes. I think that people like Tiger Woods and Tom Brady and Michael Jordan, often at the peak of when they're envied for and admired for their performance or whatnot, that they're living kind of painful lives in a way that I think gets celebrated so frequently and with so little critique that it really inflects the way people grow up in competition, thinking that if you're not sacrificing everything, that the balance is kind of pussy talk, if you will.
Yeah.
That's just me shouting from the mountain.
Yeah, I think for myself, I think one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to games, sports, competing in general, is that it allows me, or I am very apt to be able to just forget everything else and be wholly absorbed in that activity. I think that's why it's had so much appeal for me. As someone who has had like very high levels of anxiety and various struggles, let's say, like there's a big appeal to that.
I may overstate this mentally, but there are these unconscious things I'll do, say crack my knuckles, is one of them. Sometimes I could bite the inside of my cheek or whatnot. And I kind of correlate that with anxiety or discomfort on some level. It doesn't have to be massive. Oftentimes it's just boredom, let's say. But I realize when I play a whole day of sports, I don't do any of those things really. They just don't happen. And yeah, there's something about losing yourself in a game that is so appealing. But it is interesting the different routes people take to that. And yeah.
Yeah, and you have to also acknowledge what you are ignoring or repressing at some point, right? If you're, it's kind of what I was saying earlier with kind of looking at
Explore the other side.
what you're leaving behind by being so driven in one direction. If you don't, I'm pretty into Jungian concepts right now. I'm like reading a bunch of his work, and yeah, that idea that if you repress something in yourself, it will find a way to manifest unconsciously. And yeah, maybe that's the case for some of these people who've been so one-sided in their focus, and probably the case for me also.
I think a lot of the issue stems from the language that surrounds these conversations. You heard me earlier kind of say like, I think a lot of this probably strikes people as pussy talk. And if you rephrased it to like, oh yeah, like increased cortisol levels, big problem. And, I've really noticed my serotonin goes up when I take care of myself in the morning, or, like the dopamine is really at its highest coming off of a good tennis session. Then I think, this, you give some metrics, you give, these benchmarks, and then achievement oriented people maybe recalibrate their lives to say like, oh yeah, I realize when I care this much about losing, like the effect it has on my heart long term because of the increased cortisol levels is bad for longevity. Therefore, I will try to be a happier person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's my sales pitch for the overachiever out there who wants to kind of get more balance.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sitting through that. Wanted to ask you a question about the economics of attention at the table. We were talking earlier about, being somewhat of an open container to kind of pick up on things that you might not have been able to prepare for ahead of time. There is a vibe and there's real stuff going on, but there's also so many things to work on. Counting the pot, is a very basic one that's super important in live poker. But I'd like to hear your best explanation of how you try to divide your attention up. Maybe starting deep stack chips play, and if there's a different division when you are at a final table, I'd love to hear about
it. Yeah, I guess I have in the past been very focused on, okay, I need to know exactly like how much in the pot at all times, even hands I'm not playing, all the action, make sure I see all the showdowns so that I can like store that as knowledge, get reads, whatever. And like I was saying, as of late, I've given myself a bit more flexibility on that to pay attention to things that may or may not be relevant and just kind of be more tuned into the general energies that are going on. I think the most important thing is eliminating things that you can say definitely aren't helpful, whether that be social media or if you catch yourself thinking something about a thought pattern that is unhelpful, whether it's like judging your past play or lingering on a hand or thinking about something you have to do after the tournament's finished. Like the sooner you can identify that and nip that in the bud and revert your attention back to just kind of the here and now, the better. In terms of what to pay attention to and when, I'm not sure that I could give like a ranking of like what's most important. I would say for me, there's this kind of dual focus on the external and the internal, like being conscious of my own mental processes, whether that's kind of just monitoring like what I'm thinking about. Like I said, like did I spend the last 10 minutes thinking, replaying some conversation I had with someone on break because for whatever reason, and kind of keep pulling myself into the moment. And then obviously just the situation, I would say, yeah, flexibility is probably important. So I wouldn't want to say like, okay, you need to be paying attention to exactly XYZ. Knowing stack sizes, I guess, is pretty important. Not being surprised when someone behind you shoved for 9 big blinds and you thought they had 15 and you wish you hadn't opened your hand or whatever. That kind of thing is pretty useful. But yeah, I'm not sure I have a specific place that I would advise putting your attention when you're playing.
Curious if you have any advice for me on this. When I think about, I, over a long poker trip, am pretty low focus relative to my peers. I get up and stretch, do these things that I like to do that I think help my focus, but the bar that I'm trying to reach generally is probably way lower than many of my peers. It's a very selective focus. One of the issues I think, because I don't think I have ADD or have focus problems in general. I just am someone who kind of wants to think about what I want to think about. And often what I don't want to think about is ranges or prepping. So at a final table, it's far easier for me where I can see the catastrophic mistake I could make in a moment if I'm not relatively prepared with my 14 big blind stack on how to react to the open from the guy on my right. But by and large, playing 80 big blinds, chips play, against another reg in the early stages of a tournament, I'm not doing much prep work at all. And when I correlate it to sports, I'm very focused and typically can do a really good job of preparing because I think take racket sports, the ball's coming to me basically every time in a moment. And I feel that pressure constantly coming. There's an opportunity always right around the corner. And we don't have that with poker. That's why I love heads up poker. But in tournament poker, your opportunity might be hours away. And by and large, many of your quote opportunities, there's not too much to be done with them. It's, like, oh, probably should defend here, check fold the flop. There's a lot of that going on. Any advice or thoughts around how to kind of reframe the problem if a person with my issues wants to kind of increase their focus despite, let's say, not being on stage as often as you are in an individual sport?
Mm-hmm. I've always found it helpful to have a kind of game plan in place at every table that I'm at. I don't always do it, but I find that when I have consciously gone through, looked at all my opponents, and thought about like the specific adjustments I want to be making in the moment, I find that the opportunities to exercise those exploits seem to present themselves kind of uncannily often. So just like having that as a general kind of approach of making sure like at every time you move tables or like kind of reset from a break or whatever it is, just having a general idea or refreshing in your mind, maybe if you have some approaches that you like to take versus different people, just reminding yourself of them to keep it fresh in your mind. And then I can't speak for you, but for me, I tried to insert the curiosity and the love of the game that kind of is naturally in me into situations that I'm not involved in, and kind of try and make games out of it for myself. Like, every hand that you're not a part of is an opportunity to kind of practice the skills that you're going to need when you are in a hand, and you have the freedom of not needing to necessarily be thinking about a specific hand or what your strategy or the pot size or whatever. If you're feeling like working on live reads, you can be like really intent on specific people or specific actions, or just trying to guess whether someone's bluffing every time there's a hand or not, and then getting the validation at showdown.
Yeah.
Or just trying to think about how you would play different spots. I guess it's not going to work if that's not something that is appealing to you anyway. But I find that when I'm able to get into the zone and be very focused, it doesn't feel like I'm forcing myself to pay attention. Like I'm, the teacher in class that's telling myself to sit up and look forward and whatever.
Yeah, you're fucked when that comes in.
Like a natural, I'm really interested in just this situation in front of me. Like, oh, what's going to happen? Wow, he bet really big.
Yeah.
Oh, what's he going to do here? What would I do if I had a bluff catcher? Just trying to kind of create that. Whatever you love about poker, like trying to bring that into the situation, even if you're not involved in the
sales pitch accepted. You started with the think about what exploits you want to be using on different guys. You know your customer here. That was a great place to start, and then like looking out for those, and then part two, gamify everything. Again, I mean, Stevie is a salesman. I want to see that. That's Second Life for Stevie. I could see. But you need to shave the beard. It needs to be just the mustache again for Stevie salesman.
Yeah. More
I like that. Yes. There we go. That's the 1930s salesman. On the topic of gamify everything, are you down for a round of the game?
Sure. Okay. Do you want me to show the camera?
Yep. Show the camera. We're good?
Yep.
All right. Question number 1.
So ace is high or ace is low? I never remember.
Ace is high. Yep. Ace is the highest, 2 is the lowest. Subjective questions for those who don't know the game. And question 1 is, if you could place one thought into the mind of every person on Earth that they will pretty firmly believe, aces, what you think would be best impact or be best for Stephen Chidwick, whatever you're interested in, and 2 would be catastrophically bad.
I should pick up tennis.
I should pick up tennis. All right. Every person on the planet is going to firmly believe they should pick up tennis.
Actually,
it's going to be.
I immediately see a downside to my.
I was just going to throw the funny critique of like some people that just like closest tennis court 3,000 miles away. Fuck.
Yeah, no, I can never get a court. Like this would actually kind of be a nightmare.
That's a really good one too. Yeah, you're paying like $2,000 an hour for court time. Oh man, with all the pickleball courts being built in the States and some people getting frustrated over that land use, man, the land, like this might be an ecological disaster with all the pavement we're going to put out there.
Yeah, this is like the paperclip thing.
Yeah.
10 the whole world in the paperclip. Okay.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to take in the spirit of the answer. I don't think we can allow a second answer. We've got. I know what's going on. We'll see about that. At every table that you sit down at for, let's say, 2 hours or more, you're going to have to try and kind of proselytize. You're going to be pushing a viewpoint, one that you don't currently believe in, or it's not something that you're a believer. It could be a conspiracy theory, a religion, a diet tip, whatever, but you're going to be the annoying, obnoxious guy who won't shut the fuck up about this. So 2 is terrible. Ace is like, whatever. If I have to do that, it's not the worst.
2 is something that I really wouldn't want to have to advocate for. But you said
yeah,
like
2 is like Holocaust denier area, and yeah.
So what's Ace?
Probably worse. Ace is like, okay, whatever. I'm telling people about like the type of nut brand that I don't actually prefer to the other one, something like that.
Okay.
Planters is surprisingly underrated.
Why a Lamborghini is the best car?
Okay. Ostentatious Stephen Chidwick. We all knew it. We all knew this was just a big cover. It's all about the glitz and the glamour. He's finally outed himself. All right. Bright green Lamborghini. Why Lamborghini is the best part. That would be hilarious. Every table, Stevie won't shut the fuck up about it. And then they're like, well, do you have one? No.
I would have to get one at that point.
Yeah, you got to live the life.
Yeah,
you can't be like doing the whole Bluetooth may cause cancer, and here I am with my AirPods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Everyone should pick up tennis. Lamborghini is the best car. Jack
is correct.
Let's go. While I'm riding the momentum from that W, we'll go to Jaffe's least favorite, but still interested, strategy corner.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the difference between precision and accuracy, what that means, and how it pertains to studying poker?
That's a good question. Can I talk about that? What is the difference between precision and accuracy? Precision.
All right, I'll save this for
I guess you're referring to accuracy being like, did you do something that was allowed? And precision being like, did you bet exactly 43% of the time?
Yeah. As it's kind of been explained to me from DeVoris and Petrangelo, it's the difference between, I have a lot of students who like using GTO Wizard and the trainer in particular. And no matter how many times I emphasize it, they are very interested in the double check mark, the most common play that the solver is choosing in a spot. And I'm saying, stop going for the double check mark. That's not how it works. Realistically, high level pros use the RNG and try to, if they roll a 70, try to imagine, is my hand taking this action, 70% or more, and kind of working off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Curious if you could talk about maybe the issue with always going for the majority play and difference in how you like to study as it pertains to that.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's obviously value in not making mistakes, but the real world application of what you're studying is that if you always do the thing that's the most frequent for your hand, or always do kind of even just the natural thing, you're prone to leaving big issues later in the tree where you just arrive at a node and you have no bluffs, or you arrive at a node and you're completely capped and they can bet huge with their value hands because you would have always played a flush draw differently on an earlier street. So I think that what you see out of the best players is the it's not like you have to play, you have to get all the mixes right, you have to do everything the exact amount of time, but just the overall effect of playing the low frequency lines with every combo is that you don't arrive at a node where suddenly you're kind of out to dry. Where I think people can probably intuit where this happens when they get somewhere and they're like, okay, well, I can't value bet very big because I don't have any bluffs, or like they are up against someone and they're saying, okay, he's just never bluffing here because he has nothing to bluff with. And I think that that's the side that you don't really. It's kind of what's below the surface when you're just looking at doing the most frequent thing, and or just looking at not making mistakes, which kind of goes in hand. Is if you're not willing to try and find the low frequency plays, then you're going to create problems for yourself that it might be hard to anticipate at that time.
Yeah, and I think now you're touching on something that Ike and I talked a fair amount about, making sure you have bluffs everywhere, and especially when you're thinking pre-flop and then the flop, if you chalk things up to a rounding error and keep rounding to zero, it compounds. And then by the time you get to the river, it's a vastly different story. And it's so easy on the surface to see the benefit of doing the rounding and, let's say, simplifying and or making sure you don't blunder, because if you think something maybe bluffs 12% of the time, it doesn't ever feel like a mistake to go to zero, but you are almost certainly, there's a possibility it never bluffs. It's a 0%er and you're going to blunder, which has this connotation of like, oh, those are the crimes you can't commit. There are different, sins of, commission that are not the end of the world, but a blunder is, oh, you must be playing bad.
Yeah, and it's always hidden from you when you are playing versus on a trainer, for example, because the trainer always assumes that you arrive at the node with the right frequencies of everything. So you can be clicking away, get all the decisions right, and you haven't told it on the river that you never check raise middle pair on the flop. So now it's happy, it's got trips, and it shows you, whatever hand, and you can continue just doing the obvious thing. But in real life, obviously, if you're playing against very strong opponents who are capable of recognizing those imbalances on the early streets, all of these indifferent decisions that can go either way and you don't get dinged for in the trainer, now maybe one of them's just losing like 8 big blinds because they fold every bluff catcher or whatever.
Yeah. It brings me back to a comment you made to Seth and I in Montenegro on a different topic, but you were telling us how essentially some of your mental game has evolved, and for various reasons, not just trying to evolve as a poker player, but also, as a person, as a dad. And what you were mentioning was not identifying with certain things, like you made a bad play doesn't mean you are a bad player, and the word should you've kind of maybe not eliminated from your vocabulary. That would make talking difficult, but you've replaced it. I'd like you to talk about that in a moment, but this may be tough for the viewer to follow, as you and I know what we're talking about. But when it comes to the solver and a lot of these blunders, I think that it inflects a lot of people's thinking, where they may be told by a better player or understand themselves that this isn't exactly a blunder, but seeing red and seeing blunder come up, still your brain, as you put it, and I really liked this, your brain tries to make sense of it and harmonize. That may not have been your word, but eventually you want coherence in your brain, and your brain will kind of, let's say, be drawn to the gravity of coherence and make those two things gel in some way or another. And you can start believing things are blunders that you kind of know aren't blunders. And then that goes the other direction too. I unloaded a lot there. Take any of that that you find most interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it's just something to always be cognizant of. I tend to find that my biggest mistakes I make against a trainer, they tend to come out of an exploit that I think is good in real life, whether or not it's I'm taking it too far or not. Usually it's because like I have a hand that's supposed to beat or chop with a value bet, and just like no human I've ever seen has like plays the hand like it plays, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the trainer is good to train your intuition, but you have to be careful that when you find a surprising result, you don't take it as gospel and say, okay, like I need to be playing like this. You say, oh, that surprises me. Probably means that my opponents aren't playing like this. So what ramifications does that have, like on earlier branches of the trees? Like how does that mean they're playing the previous streets that might have impacted this situation? And if you do think people are kind of reaching that spot with similar ranges and you're surprised at the result, probably a lot of other people are surprised at the result or don't know the result, just don't know the spot very well. So what does that mean that you can do on the earlier streets to get to that node with more hands that benefit from whatever surprised you? You know, like if you think that a spot is you're supposed to bluff catch way wider than you think anyone does or you think you do. It means, okay, they're not putting enough money in, or they're not value betting thin enough. So what does that mean? I don't want to be slow playing earlier streets because the solver assumes that I'm going to get all of this money from bluffs or thin value that I don't think exists in real life. So I'm going to tweak that on an earlier street, and it can affect just a completely different hand on a different street. But yeah, I think I guess that would be the distinction between deliberate practice and kind of just going through the motions of playing both the trainer and trying to get a high score, you know.
And it's interesting, you know, when you kind of sum it up with deliberate practice, they're not the same, but intentionality, deliberate practice, I think does, for me anyway, there's a connotation of right and wrong, which is not what you're describing. The reality is a lot of this is, if not unfalsifiable, it takes a lot of work to truly, you know, like you're guessing. You can't in the end say for sure how things would work. And one of the big appeals, you know, almost philosophically to solvers is this kind of thirst that people have for concrete answers, which pretty much everyone, you know, part of the curve with learning with solvers is eventually saying, okay, this is not everything. This, because we're still playing against human beings, this is a really good guide, and how good of a guide it is depends on, you know, the type of players you're actually playing against. For some player pools, it all falls apart on the turn. It's just like an entirely different situation. And for others, you know, you may actually want to be looking at the river in terms of like this combo that I can almost see no difference between this combo and that. There probably is something. I'm playing against Stephen Chidwick. Like I should look into why the solver wants to call this king high and not that king high. That seems pretty important. But yeah, I think about, I love some of the lessons poker has taught us, or thoughts that it's provoked, that don't necessarily help your poker game, but are just interesting to me intellectually. And one of them is, I've really realized through poker and the evolution of the knowledge in poker how much I like chaos and how much I enjoy when it's unknowable, and how I can get a little bit depressed, bored, ready to move on when the answer is fully fleshed out, like a solved game. I mean, in its simplest form, everyone is like that. We're not playing tic-tac-toe tournaments. Poker will never look like that, but even when I catch a glimpse of that, I'm like, I kind of want to do something else.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about poker, is that there's always the human element that will never go away. And even if you have like a everything perfect solution that people can access with some kind of brain chip or whatever, like, you still have the physical element, you still have people's psychology and their people's biases. And yeah, there just isn't a knowable correct answer, and you have to, I guess, learn to live with the ambiguity of that's something that I struggled with for a long time, and I think I shied away from making big exploits for a long time, because I felt like I needed them to be right. If I was going to make a big exploit and it was wrong, I was just going to beat myself up about it, and it felt like really high stakes. And I knew that if I kind of played closer to what would be theoretically optimal, at least I'd have that to fall back on.
Yeah, there's like these mental guard or emotional guardrails.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess you kind of limit yourself if you take that approach. And more and more I've learned to just have the trust in myself to be able to look back at a decision not uncritically or not unobjectively, but also not super judgmentally, and just leave it as open-ended. Like, did I have enough confidence in this read to make this exploit? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. When you talk about that, I think about just kind of this universal concept outside poker, but the poker table kind of shines a light on it for a lot of people, which is you live your life often in avoidance of pain. And for a lot of players who are really high level players, there's a lot of pain in a non GTO play that didn't go well. And that kind of fear of that pain, which is a special kind of pain for many people, leads to this default, I'll do what the solver said. I mean, other people, like when I think about people who just dust it in cash games, it's the pain of boredom. They're just playing 7-5 suited under the gun because they just don't like sitting around and being bored. It's all different types of pain. But, I think another one that's very obvious, and you see this a lot with very accomplished people, I think, they're used to winning so much in life and getting their way that they're very scared to bluff and get caught bluffing. It feels like getting caught with your pants down. And so some very impressive people often have this kind of aversion to aggressive plays that don't go well. But whole other tangent.
Let's go to yourself.
So you say that again?
I said poker teaches you a lot about yourself.
You've spent the better part or a large portion of the past 10 years or so in Vegas. What's the best thing about being in Vegas?
Honestly, I love a lot of things about Vegas. I really enjoy spending time there. If I had to pick one thing, it'd probably be the climbing. I really enjoy rock climbing and get to climb with my good friend Andrew Lichtenberger. But honorable mention to the food is obviously incredible, and poker is very good too.
It is maybe my favorite food city in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you just have so much choice available at all times of the day. Yeah, you can get whatever you want, basically.
What's the worst thing about spending so much time in Vegas?
Worst thing would have to be the heat in the summer. It's pretty oppressive. Um, yeah.
If you could change one thing about the tournament poker world, what would it be?
Um, if I could change one thing, it would be to have everyone stop stalling.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I think that we've kind of shifted as far as we can from like the operator standpoint of how much they can do to curtail it, and I think they've actually started going too far. So I think we need more of a community discussion around stalling in general and trying to get reach a different equilibrium, let's say, because when I speak to people, even the people who are stalling a lot, the most common sentiment is like, I don't want to be stalling, but they feel like they have to, or they feel like if they don't, it's they're leaving money on the table or whatever. I think there's a bunch of different justifications, but the overriding sentiment is like, no, everyone would prefer if nobody sold. So I think
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's worth talking about and trying to think about how to get to a more a place where people are stalling less, I guess.
Yeah, I forget exactly what the phrasing that gets thrown around these problems is, but it's something like on an individual level, it's always going to be good to stall, and on a collective level, it's always going to be bad to stall. And those kinds of problems are so difficult to solve, but I feel like we, at least in the high stakes, have such a strong ecosystem where like ethics, even if somebody wasn't naturally a particularly ethical person and maybe was very self-centered, you get forced down some really good ethical chambers to make it to high stakes poker. And it kind of has been this really good filter. Seth and I talked about it a bit, where there's a lot of trust, even among people who have very different backgrounds and might not be friends off the felt, because of what it takes to be in that world. I do feel like this is a solvable problem. I feel like if the top guys come together and create a discussion, yeah. Do you have any ideas for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, what I like to do with people when I discuss this is I like to equate it to something that could be technically seen along similar lines, but is viewed very differently, which would be um, like saying when you see a flash card or you see someone expose their hand or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Because all the same people who say like, oh, I feel like I have to stall because if I don't, other people can do it and benefit. You could say the same thing about um, informing the table when you saw a card. It's in your best
Mm-hmm.
interest personally to withhold that information. There's nothing technically, I believe, in the rules that says you have to say if you saw something. There's always going to be people who don't say anything and benefit from that. So structurally, it's like very similar, I think, but it's viewed through a completely different lens where it's not really socially acceptable um, to not say what the card is, not inform the table. And I think almost everyone playing high stakes does say when they saw a flash card and they tell the table, and I think it works. Certainly, there are going to be always people who abuse it, and that's going to be the case with stalling too. If we do manage to make inroads there, but I think it shows that it can be, we can be in a better situation than we are now. I think it just kind of takes looking at the situation kind of objectively, and it's easy to kind of not address it or to repeat the same justifications of, like I've said, it's in, I have like an obligation to do what's best for me financially or for my investors. I've heard also people say that a lot. But I think if we break it down and kind of examine all the points, I think we can realize that, yeah, everyone does want to get to a place where it's not a part of the game. It's not an enjoyable part of the game for anyone. Not like the people who are doing it don't enjoy doing it. Obviously, the people who don't do it don't enjoy the people that do it. So, yeah, I think just thinking about, I guess I'm kind of rambling here. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, other than to just address it continuously. And I think it has to basically start with the best players, the people playing Tritons, the people. First off, obviously, this is kind of self-interested. I think the best players stand to gain the most from nobody stalling, right? Like if we're all playing more hands, the best players benefit the most. And secondly, like those are the players who have the biggest influence on other players. And like when I review a Triton and I see, this guy's gone all in except for one chip, and now someone shoved, and now he's sitting there and using 3 time banks to like try and get a page jump before he calls all in. It's so painful to watch, and I know that's like there's so many people watching these streams and like presumably holding these people as like the example of what it is to be at the top of the poker world. And so, yeah, I think as it has to start with the top players talking about it and trying to change it.
Yeah, there's a few things in there that I really like. One was you mentioned briefly the investors, and an obnoxious phrase that I don't like associated with business that comes up a lot is fiduciary responsibility. And to me, that's always been like a smokescreen for being an asshole. It kind of lets you be selfish because you're not being selfish for you, you're being selfish for your investors. And I think that if the onus was entirely on the individual, this would be a lot easier. I don't like shaming as a technique for social change, but some, let's say, gentle cousin of shaming. I don't know what his name is, but social pressure has its place. That's kind of how we affect change. I think in this modern world, it's probably gone way too far with social media and how quickly you can amplify a message, but also how loudly you can say a message without looking a person in the eyes certainly allows for too much. But that's one of the things that I worry about. And when you mentioned the reg holding on to the chip, it's funny because you don't see this very often in super high stakes, but in evolution, there's a concept runaway selection, where are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not sure.
If I'm getting it right, this is secondhand an explanation from my girlfriend who's a biologist, but you think about like a peacock or a bird with pretty feathers, and it's the males looking to mate. They're trying to attract attention, but it starts to run away to the point where now these birds are so encumbered by this high metabolic cost of an absurd tail, and now they can't even fly, all to attract a mate. And they've now they're being predated on like no other. Anyway, when I think about the evolution of these kinds of things, that they get lost sometimes. And I was playing with a reg in a 3,500 WPT. The guy minimum has a 30 ROI, but possibly way higher in this tournament. And we're level 1 or level 2, and he bluffs all but one chip, starting like 200 BB deep. And I'm just thinking, and yeah, so he gets called, mucks, he has one big blind left. He ends up running it up to like 15. Great, amazing EV on your one big blind, but he's spending an average of like 15 or 20 minutes at the table from, with this stack that's almost never going to be anything, when if he could just go rebuy, he's going to have, he's going to get to fully realize his ROI from the start. And sometimes it can be a little amusing when a really crafty or tricky play gets used so much that it becomes to the person's detriment.
Yeah, and I guess that's the danger of, in my mind, of this kind of attitude being prevalent at high stakes, is that it's easy to imitate and it's easy to say, okay, like I'm taking myself seriously. I want to be at the top of poker. Like I gotta play like these people, and then like just kind of copying that and doing it in every situation with no regard for context or whatever. And I think it's interesting that that there is more of a culture, I would say, in America of not stalling. If you play like a random WPT, I would say like the percent of people who are stalling close to the money is, well, you could tell me better than me, but it seems to me like it's a bit more looked down on and a bit less practiced in America. So we definitely can like get to reach different equilibriums through just like shifting how we think about it.
Yeah, there's a vibe thing on the other extreme of the continuum. If there's one thing that I would take from the cesspool that is private cash games, it would be like respect for each other's time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also the thing you said about it coming from the top players, this is where I'm going to throw my guest on the hot seat quickly, but I think a lot of it came from the best players in the first place, because there's a difference. The thing about it is, with newish ecosystems, and poker is a very new ecosystem, in the same way that, we judge our historical figures very differently for the times they lived in, poker is a very fast moving world. And if 15 years ago, I can remember 15, yeah, probably 15 years ago, you and George 95 are like legendary sit and go players. And to my eyes, you were some of the first people who figured out stalling to let the blinds go up on other people's blinds. That was a massive EV gain. And there's no way that I would have remotely thought of it as unethical or bad practice. You're just sharp and ahead of the curve. And it's this weird thing that once everyone catches up, it's like, now it's just bad for everyone, and it's strange to say the ethics of it change, but that's kind of how I view it. It's similar to like everyone grew up in a grind house to some degree, and your buddy was just like, oh, I'd fold, that guy never bluffs there. Was that ghosting? Absolutely. But I don't know anyone who was like, earmuffs, I didn't hear anything, I'm making my own complete decision. Like, that was poker. But now, like, the lines have been drawn much more clearly, and I don't know about that one. I still think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who says you can't, say anything when you're in the room with your buddy, but it is certainly ghosting and some form of cheating. But then there's, much more clear lines about what, with ghosting anyway, is for sure not kosher.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you bring it up, because I don't want to come across as like the moral police, or saying that I like nobody should stall and I don't stall and I'm like better than anyone. I definitely don't think that at all. I've done my fair share of stalling. I still sometimes stall. Like I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to paint myself as um, the moral authority, and I don't even really think that it necessarily needs to be a moral question. Um, I think we can look at it just out of self-interest. We, like I said, we all would like to get to a point where it's practiced less. And I think you can take different approaches to it. If you do believe that it's a problem, or it's something that we can improve on, you can either just do it anyway under the justification that you can never stop everyone doing it, and it's always in your best interest, and you can just kind of accept that that's the choice you're making. You could also do it an amount that lines up with kind of the average person, if that makes sense. So if half the people are stalling relentlessly, half the people are never stalling, you could stall half the time in the most highest EV situations for you. and then you would be kind of a neutral actor, right? You're neither making the problem worse nor better, or you can go on the other side and try to be, I guess, like a force for change in the direction of things that you wish they were.
I hate being a crusader, but I kind of do that with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I definitely don't have like solutions, but I think it's worthwhile to discuss it and bring it more into the public.
So this one's on me, but that's our longest fast fire questions date. That was entirely me saying
into a different part of the podcast.
Continuing with our fast fire. What's a better feeling? Getting a fold from an opponent when you're bluffing after a long tank, or getting paid off for equal EV after a long tank?
Definitely bluffing and having them fold. Yeah,
I'm with you. There's something special about relief.
Yeah, the relief. If you have a good hand and you're trying to get paid, it's kind of win-win. You're gonna win the pot either way. But the flip from like, will they call, won't they call, and it's gonna be either a disaster or great. Like, yeah, it definitely feels better to have them fold.
Next Triton Invitational has a very strict dress code. Furries only. What are you going as?
Furries only. That's like I have to dress as an animal.
Yeah.
I would go as a koala.
Ooh, koala. So whose pouch? Who are you invited in? I think if that's how it works, your recreational or your VIP ends up being the pouch you have to stay in.
The pouch I have to stay in.
Well, do you have somebody for Monte Carlo already?
I don't have someone for Monte Carlo as we speak. No.
All right. Any VIPs out there watching? Steven would like to be in your pouch.
Yes.
All right. You're at the poker table. You're mostly lost in thought, but you hear one word or phrase that is not about you, your family, or the action at the table. This is what's most likely to kind of pique your interest, where you're like a little bit broken from your spell. Oh, what's going on here?
I mean, probably something related to some danger, like what's that guy doing with a gun or something? I don't know.
That's fair. Man, dude, I like every once in a while, if I hear a bang in the tournament room in Florida, I'm fucking on a swivel.
Yeah, that was a crazy moment in Vegas. What was it, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I missed that, but that's insane.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. How there's like poker tournaments are just this huge collection of people in a small space, and America has a lot of guns. It's crazy.
What was your story on that day?
I took a different approach to a lot of people, actually. So I was like kind of in the back of I don't know what that room is called, like the main room at Paris.
Amazon, maybe?
Amazon was in the Rio, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the Paris.
Good point.
And yeah, like people have been talking about it. Someone said there was like an active shooter at a different casino or something. And then, yeah, I'm like over like by where the King's room is. And then all of a sudden, like there's all this commotion at the other end of the room. People just start sprinting like in my direction, basically, like away from that side. I decided that, well, I don't know if I decided. It was, I guess, more of a instinctual thing. I just went like under the table, and I was looking at the doors that everyone was running away from, waiting to see like who would come in, because I figured like if someone is coming through that door with a gun, I don't want to be back turned to them in the middle of a big group of people trying to get out of the door. That seemed like a bad idea. So I just went under the table and like was looking at those doors and like looking at like where I could go if like someone came through. And then within about 20 seconds of all the commotion, a security guard just like casually was strolled through those doors and is like, why is everyone freaking out?
Oh man.
And then it very quickly diffused the situation in that room to like, okay, this is like, there's not a situation going on. But it was absolute chaos. There was like chips around my table from like a tournament that was happening like 20 rows of tables down. There was like phones everywhere, shoes everywhere, tables flipped over. It was absolute, yeah, it was crazy.
False alarms are like this like augmented reality where you get to see yourself in these situations that you don't ever want to be in when they're real, but you're like, I mean, I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but generally I've been grateful for those experiences in the aftermath. Like, wow, that was a different kind of peak experience that I got to safely experience.
Yeah, I think we all wonder sometimes about like, what would I do in this hypothetical situation? Because
Yeah.
you can't really predict it ahead of time. There's so much going on, and yeah, it's interesting to see different people's responses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is also too like even it's everything is mood subjective. So like even the craziest, highest stakes things, it's like might make a difference if you're caffeinated or not. Like, you know, your response.
Mhm.
I've noticed myself in situations where like I've come close to getting in a fight with someone over something incredibly trivial that 99.8% of the time that would never be on my radar. I would be laughing at someone who would do such a
Mhm.
thing. And then I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me that I'm like wanting to come to blows right now? This is nuts.
And it's just because you haven't eaten in 4 hours.
Something like that. Yeah.
That's always the case for me. And like whenever I catch myself being like irritated at something I don't usually get irritated by, I'm like, oh, I need to eat something. It's just
Yeah.
like
You've
it's pretty consistent.
you've heard about those famous studies about the judges and their sentences when they're like before lunch and after lunch.
I haven't, but that doesn't surprise me.
It's extreme. Like it
Yeah,
makes you just like, oh fuck, this
yeah,
justice system that I thought was so complete and thorough. In the end, we're just apes who need our bananas.
yeah. That's why we need
All right.
Judge AI determining everything.
Yeah, certainly. Let's start with MLB umpire AI and move from there. But
Yeah, test it out at lower stakes first.
who's someone with, say, 25 mil plus Hendon mob who you think the poker public still doesn't really appreciate just how good they are?
Hmm. The poker public just at large.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm trying to go down the list in my mind. I mean,
You
there's
can look.
people who I think underrated, but I think they're still rated very highly. I guess that would be most people on the 30 million plus cashes list. Um, I think that it feels strange to say Jason because like he's obviously like crazily accomplished and very well renowned, but I don't think that he um, perhaps gets the credit as like the best player, like one or and I don't think he's enough named as one of the absolute like top 1, 2, 3 players in the world.
Mhm.
But I think when you look at how good he is, not only at no limit tournaments, but also short deck, also cash games, heads up, he's kind of done it all. And I think that he should probably be talked about more as um, maybe the best player in the world.
You and I have both really enjoyed Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, a series of lectures by the enigmatic John Vervaeke, who he's a hell of a lecturer. Interesting guy to watch on screen, but no, I have a lot of trouble describing it to people, or at least giving a brief synopsis. Curious if you can tell the audience a bit about Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, what you've taken away from it, who you might recommend it to, and if there's anyone where you'd say, like, yeah, this probably isn't for you necessarily, you can skip this part.
Yeah, so it's like I think it's 51-hour lectures or something like that, on the history of, I guess, philosophy and religion through a cognitive science lens. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, like a history of knowledge and how we got to where we are today,
Mm-hmm.
the way that we think.
Yeah. Um, in terms of what I've got from it, I mean, I find the topic very interesting, and I've read a bunch of books that he recommends. Maybe 1% of all the books he recommends, because it's about 10 books per episode. But I've just enjoyed the paths that it's led me down, evaluating my own beliefs, and maybe more so than what I've kind of learned from it. I feel like I've unlearned some of my like erroneous beliefs, and I have a bit more nuance in my thinking about different things, and just having the context of all of that history and the context of kind of rationality and how that emerges in the brain. I've just found it to be kind of a helpful in like changing the lens that I see things through, more so than kind of any specific piece of knowledge that I've gained.
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think when I think about my perception of maybe what a lot of the audience for this podcast is, and a lot of my friends in poker, there can be a very directed sort of learning, for instance, studying poker, of course. And I think a lot of the biggest leaps we make cognitively are, to be cliche about it, when you're not looking for it, when you're just kind of taking in something. For me, oftentimes it's been fiction. It's been like reading a book that's a good family drama, and I feel like, wow, I learned a lot about my brother or my mother through this in a way that maybe I couldn't in such a direct manner. And that's kind of like my feeling from Vervaeke is there's never a goal going into it. Like I just kind of am wowed by him. It's very dense. It's difficult to listen and takes a bit. I've watched it entirely with my good friend Chad Evaslage, and I'm not finished with it. I'm close to 30 hours in because I only watch it when he and I are living together in Vegas for like WSOP, and we pause every 5 to 20 minutes to discuss and try and flesh it out and try to argue about it, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's been very enjoyable. But it's really, for me, changed the way I think about language. He's so precise in his language and in breaking down the equivocating that we're doing all the time without knowing it, and
Mm-hmm.
misusing our language, and then it inflects how we think. One thing I really liked, I'd be curious, that this is a lens I've been wearing for the past, I think it was only this World Series that I got to this point, but he was talking about general intelligence, and what he, kind of views as intelligence. And relevance realizations, realizing what is relevant, what is salient or germane to a given situation, and how well you can kind of zone in on what is relevant allows you to kind of close the problem space and not be seeing and overwhelmed by everything. Do you think about that at all when you're looking at situations now? Has the relevance realization conversation inflected your thinking at all?
Yeah, I think to kind of go back to what you were saying in the earlier part, I agree that just listening to him talk, it kind of puts you in a kind of reflective mode that helps to he always talks about like the recursive relevance realization, like the thinking about how you're thinking, or the kind of how that corrects itself, and how you change your kind of conditioned behaviors. So like just listening to like you, I do it in small chunks, or have done it in small chunks, like 20 minutes at a time. But just like listening to 20 minutes in the morning has often, I can't give a specific example, but has often kind of led to me reconsidering something that I might do automatically 99% of the time, and just catch myself and kind of examining what that means and what it says about my perspective or how I'm looking at a situation.
Yeah, I like that. I think we all have in our daily routines not even large lofty goals necessarily, but just little things like, oh, I'm going to stretch now, or whatever it is. And often you can't have a holistic approach to everything, or you'll be paralyzed by inaction. So we have all these default actions that we go through, but something that kind of zooms you out and gives you perspective, and every once in a while you're like, oh yeah, that is vestigial. That's like I shouldn't have that in my routine anymore. That was from a time that I needed that as a teenager, maybe, but I never really re-examined why I'm doing that. And now maybe the cost benefit calculus has changed. And this might be net not so helpful.
Yeah.
Which that sounds very self-helpy. So maybe this is me trying to sales pitch a lot of people who might otherwise be put off by this. You're going to get into it and say, what the fuck did Stevie and Jaffe get me into? But I would say like not the first episode, that's the syllabus, but episode 2 about flow state. And he talks about climbing a lot. I think that's kind of a good one to start with. And
yeah, I
hopefully
re-listened to that recently, actually, the episode 2. And yeah, it definitely isn't for everyone. It's like you said, very dense. I feel like a lot of it did go over my head, but
same.
I enjoyed the parts that did sink in.
Yeah, I've kind of had this approach when I introduce someone to it. I have probably shepherded close to 10 people through The Wire season 1 back in the day, where I'm like, this is so good, but they don't baby you. They just drop you in it. Have you watched The Wire?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, you're not going to know who's who. You're not going to know names. It's all going to come out slowly. So we're going to pause it every 5 minutes, and I'm going to answer your questions to make sure that we get you, and everyone has their, like, some people only need 3 episodes of that. They're like, good, I'm hooked. I'll pay attention. But a lot of people who are like passive TV watchers, which I understand for a lot of things, you can't really passively watch for Vakey. It's pretty freaking difficult for that. And I think The Wire, if it's your first watch, you're drawing dead to get 70% out of it. You're just mostly going to confuse yourself. So yeah, I've done kind of a similar thing with Vervaeke, where I've watched that flow episode with, I don't know, 5+ people, maybe more.
I have this anxiety every time I launch into a answer that I'm just talking nonsense, and I feel like I'm not saying anything of any substance.
You just need to do it enough times, and then that anxiety will go away. It's kind of like, you just it's like getting caught bluffing. And then it just like I've decided I sound like a fucking annoying parrot like enough times that I no longer seem to feel much about it. It's like they clicked voluntarily. They were not forced in a room with us.
True. And you'll edit out all of the stuff that makes me look bad. So
yeah, you for sure. That's why for years I never went on any podcast. I had way less, let's say, offers than top guys, but maybe 4 or 5 podcast offers, and I think I always knew I would have a good time going on them. But I'm like, you're going to regret so much of what you say. This is the same reason I don't have a Twitter or an Instagram or whatever. Is like, you can't give me that kind of power. And now I have a fucking podcast.
Mm-hmm. My biggest fear, which has already happened like a couple of times, is that I like start saying a sentence that I don't have an end to, and then it kind of just trails off into nothing. And then there's this really awkward moment of just silence and not being able to recover it, and it all spirals out of control. But I'm glad that those can be edited out.
Dude, that's like my trademark at this point. I pretty much end a lot of sentences with so. And then the guest is just on the like, is that for me to respond to? Or I guess Jaffe stopped talking and I see him moving, so I should start talking now. I do it in conversation all the time where I don't know. I think there's something generative about not knowing where you're going to end when you start, that I think it's important not to be afraid of those moments, and obviously being not terribly self-conscious with some of those harsh endings or unfinished endings really allows for it. But I think that freedom is really good to just kind of, again, I'm coming from a place of bias because I love to shoot from the hip. It's my natural way, is to be unprepared and see where it takes me. But I was listening to an interesting CEO on a podcast recently, and he called that his managerial style, as he just starts arguing for things all the time that he doesn't know if he believes in them or not, but just hearing himself flesh it out and hearing the pushback, he finds kind of very, I don't know if he used the word generative, but that it produces some interesting results. But again, I'm coming from a place of bias. I hate preparing, so I don't know that it's actually a feature.
Well, I think that preparing is very often, well, for me, it's definitely been, what's the word I'm looking for? Counterproductive. Like, if I know that I am going to be asked a certain question, then I find it really hard to not do this compulsive, like, answer the question in my head 100 times. And then when it gets to be time to actually answer the question, I like stumble over the words and it feels so forced and awkward all the time. Whereas like the questions that I didn't know were coming seem to come more naturally.
So much better.
Yeah.
So I don't know about are known for, but I think a lot of players have been aware of your ability to kind of keep eye contact, watch your opponent in a hand. For many players, that can be really intimidating. My question is, for some of the low or mid stakes players, or just players who play online and haven't played live, any tips for handling a stare down if they, or just being watched in general at the live poker table, in terms of kind of keeping your composure and trying to go through your process? Do you have any tips for players when they might feel uncomfortable from being stared at?
I think a lot of it just comes from experience, practice. I guess trying to emulate that in some way as a form of practice, whether it's like, okay, you're studying with someone you respect and you have to like give your answer about your hand, and there's some kind of pressure there, or just anything that kind of puts you under pressure, and experiencing that more often probably helps to get used to it.
So you and I, we previously attempted this podcast, but we had internet issues. We started off trying to do a hand history between you and Dylan Weissman that I thought was a really cool hand. Are you down to try and break it down again with me?
Yep.
So we've got about half the field left in this 30K 8-handed Triton, and 510. Dylan's playing about 500, so about 50 big blinds deep. You open 6-5 suited in the cutoff. Dylan defends the ace 8-0. We get the queen 9-6 rain, and he checks. Curious about your spot, both with your particular hand, but range versus range here, cutoff big blind.
Yeah, obviously it's a pretty dynamic texture. A lot of straight draws. I have all the offsuit 9x, which definitely makes me want to be including a small size in my strategy. If I was in an earlier position, I might play this big bet or check. But from the cutoff, I think I want a small size and then at least one big size. I would either play this as a 2 size or 3 size strategy with at least one over bet, one small bet, and then kind of maybe a middle size, depending on kind of who I'm up against and what kind of complexity I want to be playing. And then my hand, I think it can bet small or check. Maybe Solver would occasionally bet very big with it, but not very frequently.
You do opt to check. Turn 10 of spades, and Dylan goes for a pretty small bet here. 16 into 59, so a little bit more than a quarter pot. What do you make of this situation now? What are you thinking about Dylan's range?
On a board that has so much going on, like there's so many different hand classes here with the flush draw, bunch of straight draws, bunch of pair plus straight draw. Those kinds of situations lend themselves to splitting more sizes because it's kind of easy to get a bit of everything in all of your ranges, and you have different hands that benefit from different responses. So, yeah, I would expect a variety of sizes out of him. Probably nothing too big, but yeah, anything between block and pot also seems fine. He has a hand that can do a number of things as many of his hands want to do. I think if he had a spade, then he should be more likely to bet big. I think what he did is reasonable.
Mm-hmm. I think these,
in terms of his value, I guess the smaller size I would assume would be like more kind of weak queen X and 10X, like king 10, jack 10 type stuff, and then kind of a bit less like draws that don't do as good a job at blocking my continues or don't make as strong of a mate hand when they hit.
when I think about Dylan's spot here and the complexity involved, it feels emblematic of a situation that guys who play, let's say, 2K Live, ABI, where they're really struggling to take the next step into high stakes is that they have a very exploitative approach in Dylan's situation, and often rightly so, because the player in the cutoff has a very overly defined checkback range that often includes the top candidates and sometimes nothing else. And so the player in Dylan's shoes maybe has too good of an idea or thinks they have too good of an idea about the cutoff and what types of hands they're holding, and then starts to kind of do whatever they want, which by its nature is an exploitative approach. And often that's very fruitful. They've kind of honed these instincts in. And those instincts, the meta changes. So even in a 3K, it looks way different now than it did 5 years ago. But they kind of pick up on, this is how I want to play this level of value. This is what I want to do with bluffs. An easy explanation might be, in many spots when big blind probes turn after check check, in position doesn't raise as often as solver raises, particularly with bluffs. People feel, oh, I'm capped, I check the flop. If I raise here, he'll know I don't have anything. It doesn't really make sense. But point being, against a top player such as yourself and most of the players at Triton, these are really tough spots to balance if you're Dylan. I think they just you have to do a little bit of everything and explore some lines that you may not have been using against lesser opponents.
Yeah, it's definitely for such a kind of simple node, it's single raise pot versus the big blind, check check on the flop. There's a lot going on here on the turn. You can explore ideas of demi bluffing, for example, like trying to get me to fold ace 10 but call pocket eights with some sizes, or 9-8. You need to have a little bit of everything in all of your ranges, kind of, because we are so deep. The SPR is like, was it 6 and a bit? So if you are playing against a good player and you always bet your flush draws, or you never, check call something strong, there's a lot of ways to get caught out, I guess. That it's very difficult to kind of plan ahead for.
Yeah. These are spots where I get very interested in profiling my opponents, because I think a lot of players are telling on themselves in terms of how they see this situation, and then you can extrapolate from there. So you go for call. Reasonable to imagine there is a size that you would be folding if he went big enough?
Yeah, certainly. I think I have a better continue with a lot of my weaker absolute hands, with obviously something like ace jack or ace 8 with the open enders. I don't have like a ton of worse hands. Low pairs stand out, and obviously like the ace wheel or whatever when I don't see bet those. But yeah, if he pots it, I'm out of there for sure.
Get the 2 of diamonds on the river. And in this spot, Dylan goes for a pretty chunky bluff. Looks about 80 to 90% pot. What do you make of that bet?
I think you can bet that size with maybe king 10 or ace 10 plus. I think most of the weight in that size is going to be a weak queen. Obviously, you want to put your best hands in all the different sizes at some frequency, but I think kind of the story he's telling is a hand like queen 4, queen 5, something like that.
Mm-hmm. How do you distinguish between a good or bad bluff catcher in your spot?
I want to be blocking as many of the value combos and unblocking as many of the bluffs as possible. So obviously, when I have a pair on board, like the 6 here, it's a great card to bluff catch with because he has no bluffs with the 6 in them, and he has some value with the 6 in them. The 5 would be a bad card because he has a bunch of bluffs with the 5, although he does have some, like I said, Queen 5 is kind of the wheelhouse of where I think his value is going to be. So the 5 kind of is going both ways. But I think the 6 is strictly good. I think pretty much any, obviously a low spade, for example, would be worse. I think
I kind of took that 5 to be neutral. I feel like 5-7, but what other bluffs do we think involve the 5 of diamonds?
Jack 5, 8, 5, I guess. Depending on.
Do we think he's defending offsuit Queen 5 or Jack 5 versus the cutoff at 50?
How big do they open to?
Good question. Let's see.
I would say yes versus min raise.
2.2.
Close. Probably not. Probably not for 8-5. No, probably not for Jack 5. So yeah, maybe it's maybe the 5 is pretty neutral. Maybe slightly good even also.
I feel like if he has Queen 5-0, it starts to be pretty good.
Yeah.
You mentioned when we were going through our first run that maybe the 6 is even less about blocking value than just unblocking bluffs, and that you have so many cards in your range at this point that do block bluffs. Can we talk about what you think are good bluffs for Dylan and what bluffs he should be maybe giving up?
Yeah, the 6 is definitely better for unblocking bluffs than blocking value. That doesn't make a lot of sense for him to have a 2-pair in this sizing. I guess he could, but I think that often it would want to go bigger on the turn or bigger on the river. Generally, when you're thinking about bluffing and you have a lot to choose from, you want to choose first candidates the cards that you have the least frequently. So if he has, a Jack 3 suited type hand, like the 3, because he doesn't have the offsuit combos of 8-3, Jack 3, the 3 doesn't feature in many of his bluffs. So those ones you want to bluff with first, and then hands like flush draws, for example, or maybe 8x, depending. Like 8x is going to feature in some value, obviously, too. So that could go both ways. But generally, I think you want to be matching your value as best you can. And then past that, you want to be choosing either cards that you don't have very often or cards that they don't have very often to be able to tailor their bluff catching based on those cards.
Nice. Let's go for a result. Ponikov's looks really entertained. He's deep in the tank. Go for the call. Keep putting the chips out. Dylan's saying, take them back, take them back, take them back. And the raised eyebrows is always, I love the raised eyebrows when I've made a hero call. Been known to raise some eyebrows with some of my calls. But That was a great hand. I really like that. Final question. 3 recommendations for the audience. Anything.
3 recommendations. To undo my previous answer about the Lamborghini, I would recommend the Tesla Model Y. I just moved to Europe and had to buy a new car, and that was the previous car I bought. Then I just bought the same one again. Like I really enjoyed that car, and if you've never driven a Tesla, like definitely try it out because it's an enjoyable experience.
That's great.
The last book I just finished was Nexus. Yuval Noah Harari, who's the author of *Sapiens*. Really enjoyed that. A look on the history of kind of information technology and what effects it's had on just society and power structures, and what the potential implications are with the rise in AI and algorithms getting more and more power, power being in the hands of companies more than governments and more traditional places. And what else? I would recommend rock climbing. It's something that I'm very passionate about. You mentioned that Vivek uses it as an example in his episode on flow. It's kind of an ideal activity for kind of generating the flow state, where you're kind of always doing something that's at the limit of your capabilities, and you kind of need to be constantly learning new things and challenging yourself. And I just find the climbing community is incredible. Like everyone I've met who's a climber, I really enjoy being around, pretty much. And yeah, get outside, conquer your fears if you have fear of heights, and I've got a lot out of it, and yeah, I would recommend that.
We're in an echo chamber here. I have a Tesla. I love it. You got me on Nexus. I started it 3 days ago, and in my garage we have a climbing wall. My partner is very passionate about climbing. I climb a little bit, but not nearly as much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, next podcast there's going to be more about climbing. I want to talk to you about that. But one of the things in Vegas, I don't know if Heather told you, but my partner went climbing with Stevie and Chewy and some others over the summer. And in Vegas, like not the world's best climber, but probably the most famous climber, Alex Honnold, lives there. And like, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 days before you, she was just climbing with Honnold, like just goes over there and just like the world's most famous climber is there. And they're just on routes right next to each other talking the whole day. And like, what world? Like,
Yeah,
what a guy he is.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel like that's a very common thing in climbing for the best guys. Like they're almost unanimously just very down to earth, humble, just cool people to be around. Not that I have experience around like the top climbers, but that's at least the impression I've gotten. And yeah.
Everyone seems to say the same thing about them. One of the cool things I think about climbing is, at least at this point in the evolution, all the people who are the best climbers, they are truly passionate about climbing. It is not, if you wanted to get famous, this is not an efficient route to just being famous. So it just doesn't really, and so from the ground up, it doesn't really have that culture. I say that. at the ground level, actually, that culture is changing, I think, where there's a lot of, it's very Instagrammable and whatnot. So maybe, at the low level, it's a mixed bag. But to get to the upper echelons, you have to love it. There's so much sacrifice to get really good at climbing. Yeah. Very, very cool culture. I remember actually, she said to me, I was like, so how did it go? Like, did you introduce yourself, or what was the, because Heather is not someone who's just going to approach famous people and bother them at all. And she said, no, he was just kind of looking over, and he sees me looking over, and eventually he just does a head nod. And she knows embedded in that nod is just an acknowledgement, you know who I am, we don't need to do this. And then from that point on, they just talk, and it's just like normal. I thought
That's
that was
actually
really
one
cool.
of my favorite parts about meeting people in climbing is that it feels like you very often start conversations in the middle. There's never there's rarely like a, hi, I'm Steven, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah.
Very nice to meet you.
Whatever.
What do you do for work?
Oh, you're working on this problem, I'm working on this problem. Have you tried heel hooking here, or like giving people advice, or like just kind of, starting the conversation in the middle? I really enjoyed that.